Good afternoon. Um, I have this lecture about potentials of light as a driver for well-being, and I would like to start about explain a little bit of what is our lighting design philosophy here at KTH. What is our approach to educate our students for the future lighting designers? So it's about the understanding of a theoretical and practical expertise about the effects that light and lighting have on humans. That will be number one. Number two is the application of this knowledge into the architectural and built environment. That's why we are placed in the architectural school, understanding this connection between humans and the built environment. And the third one will be to use this knowledgeable information within the light sources, taking into consideration not only artificial lighting but also daylight and the technology involved in both type of lighting. This is our scheme of how we work in the lighting laboratory here at KTH. We have different areas we are getting into, but today I will talk a little bit more about the education and the research that we are doing at the lighting laboratory. In terms of education, this is our current batch of students that are going to do or light up the courtyard here at the main campus at KTH. It's an international master education, and they are coming from 20 different countries, 20 different nationalities within these 32 students. So that really has an impact of what are we doing here at KTH with the lighting design community. Based here, students are coming basically from all over the world to have their education, and later on they will, at the end, will go out back to the countries or to many other countries and spread this knowledge. So this is for us a quite important a duty we have to educate these people that are going to have an impact in the built environment. Talking about the built environment, we have also a really strong connection with daylight. Since very early in the times for modern architecture, we have been looking this type of architecture where this material, which is glass, by which we have some connection to the outdoor and also have the possibility to bring some daylight in, has a lot of impact into the space we are using. So in the 1900s, in 1914, it has been said that glass architecture is an instrument for the social good. So even back then, when the glass facade was introduced in the architecture, they were already talking about this very important factor, which is the social good. So daylight is part of this glass facade, this part of this type of architecture. So daylight as a material is something we should consider. We should consider also daylight as a form giver. Depending on how this daylight is shaping the space, it will, of course, have a huge impact in the architecture and the way it's being perceived. Daylight as a source, of course, and daylight for well-being, trying to connect this well-being to the social good that has been in the question for some time already. So on that same glass house by Bruno Todd, there have been these reflections about that the ordinary visitors to that specific building, this glass house, have frequently remarked the profound emotion they have encountered by going into these kind of spaces. Let's remember that this is kind of a new architecture back then, but they have remarked profound emotions by experiencing the space, not merely by the experience of the five senses, but for the psychic and the often visceral reflexes they had. So it's a lot of emotions involved also in the way we are able to experience daylight, architecture. The space is not only bringing a specific amount of light, but how it really connects to our behavior, to our psyche, and the way we experience the space. This is an example of some of the works that the students, not in lighting design, but the students of architecture have been developing, having a focus on daylight, how the location of the openings have shaped the building itself, the selection of the material, the selection of the volumes, the selection of the properties of the space, in order to also to influence the way people behave and move around the space, is all based on trying to have a specific goal where daylight and architecture are merged. Not only about the behavior of people in the space, but also the behavior of the light itself in the space, how light is reflected depending on the material, how you can create an entrance, a main room, people using the space, and also understanding the difference between winter and summer, all the seasonal character of how it changes from time to time, daylight. So all of this is having a huge influence in the architecture, daylight as a form giver. And also going into a more perceptual way of understanding daylight as a form giver, having some different examples of the same space with different lighting conditions depending on the time of the year, and trying to create as a design tool some parameters to focus on, to have high contrast, medium contrast, or low contrast, all within the same space, to change actually the experience of the user within the space. And all of this is based on research that has been done in the past about the topic. So there's a lot of knowledge already there, a lot of research being done, and still there's more, but now we have to use it in our design process, our architects or lighting designers, to be able to create more interesting and healthy environments. And this is happening in the urban context more and more and more and more. We have these kind of scenarios where we have buildings already in the urban fabric, and we have to adapt them and increase the height and increase new uses into the architecture, so the city can evolve and people can still function within the city. So all of these examples are adding an extra element to the already existing building. And this will, of course, have an effect on the urban fabric, how adding this amount of floors on this building, or 2 or 3 or however how many floors we integrate more into the building, they will have a consequence in the urban fabric. We might create more darker spaces on the streets, on the squares. So this is something that also daylight has to be analyzed, how adding this kind of volumes in the urban fabric will have an influence in the bigger scale, and of course if we go into the building, how it will be shaped in the interior space of the architecture. So daylight can be analyzed in different ways depending on the use. If it's an apartment, if it's a kitchen with the living room, with bedroom, the orientation taken into consideration. We can also have office. So how the daylight is changing, and also having direct sun in the morning or in the afternoon, of diffuse light at any other time of the day. So this is about the qualities of daylight can offer, and how we can shape the program of the architecture to work together with the daylight, or going a little bit more into arithmetical and geometrical analysis to see how our view is being shaped by the surrounding buildings, shaped by our building itself, and also creating some analysis to know how much light are we able to have in the different spaces that we can have in our architecture. And we could go even more complex and have some digital analysis with software that can give us more tangible values like daylight factor, or if we are able to have some glare, so the glare probability, or some solar exposure, so we know where we have to have some shadings to avoid excessive solar radiation on our interior spaces. So the tools are there. Either we go to the sophisticated one or into more analog one. There's a lot of way to create architecture taking into consideration daylight, and so it's part of the design process. And at the end, doing all of these calculations, taking into consideration all what we can have, is not just for getting numbers or values. Is to actually understand how we can shape our facade, to understand how many windows, what is the percentage of glazing we are able to provide to our facades to provide sufficient daylight, and also try to give a certain impression and experience inside the room. And then again, going back into a zoom out of the urban scale, this can be analyzed with physical models, not only with software, and see how our cities can behave. For example, taking into account how much direct sunlight can I have in the courtyard in a specific time of the year, how long our shadows are. So all the buildings within this block are influencing each other. So that's something that we should take into account, that when planning in urban context, it's not about our own block or our own building, it's about the whole city, how we can provide more useful open areas for the people throughout the year, so people are also enjoying these outdoor spaces. And the same from the physical model into digital calculations, giving another different kind of information. Here the solar radiation, while in the previous one we were able to perceive the direct sun and the quality of the shadows in the urban context. And as we know, daylight is it changes throughout the day, throughout the year, so we can have from the same room different configurations. The room can change a lot depending on how the daylight is getting into it. So that's something we have to take into account for our understanding of the interior space. And this is a graphic that each one of the lines, the blue, red, and the yellow one, are indicating the variation of daylight throughout the different hours and the lux level that we have inside the space. So it's not a soft line, a soft graphic that we can get of the daylight. Daylight changes so much, not only from day to day, but within the same day. So this is all the variation we can have from daylight. So we are used to have in the artificial context some static lighting, while the daylight has a lot of variation. And here at the Lighting Lab, there's a PhD program where there has been analyzing the different activities or different researches that are taking into consideration the spectral properties of the light, the intensity of the light. So both are being proven to have beneficial effects on the mood, the sleepiness, or the performance of the people. And taking this research that is already there, there has been created a new study where we want to understand what is the difference between having a space that is static against a space that has this variation. So artificial lighting against natural lighting. So to understand if this really affects our mood or sleepiness and performance. The settings would be natural light, artificial lighting, using the technology involved to try to get close to the daylight in terms of color temperature, color rendering, and of course we cannot reach the same lux levels or the variation, but this is ongoing research that will give us some answers. But something that we already know, that there's some positive and negative association with the daylight exposure we have as humans. I will not go through each one of them because it will take another presentation, but we can actually see that it has been proven that there are some effects that daylight has on us. And some indications or recommendations would be to be able to have a healthy environment, would be to create daylight openings that allow occasional exposure to the full radiation of the spectrum, like the one in the daylight, in comparison to the artificial lighting. Design buildings with floor plans that stimulate people to go outdoors, so we can actually not be indoors all the time, of course independent of the weather conditions, and aim for rooms with relatively high levels of light, more than 2,000 lux, to be able to have a proper level of light that trigger on us some well-being. And this is something that is just happening right now. The Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine have been granted to these researchers who has discover the molecular mechanism that control the circadian rhythm. So there is a really strong correlation between the circadian rhythm, the health, and how we are being influenced by daylight. So it's very important to this Nobel Prize, because it really is proven how daylight is beneficial for our well-being, and how daylight is actually has a really strong impact on how we behave in the space, but also how we can our health be influenced. And this can be connected with artificial lighting. There is this topic in the market called human-centric lighting, used by different manufacturers. They are promoting this idea of creating scenarios, artificial lighting scenarios, where we are able to have a human-centric lighting approach, luminaires, control systems, so we are able to somehow promote and support our circadian rhythm and our well-being. This is some of the examples that last year were shown in the biggest fair for lighting design. Some of the manufacturers are already using this kind of philosophy of human-centric lighting. So I'm sure next year is going to be bigger. So this shows how it's already happening. It has a lot of effect. But it's not only about buying a specific product and installing. You have to really plan for it and do it in a conscious way and a professional way in order to actually create something and to actually be able to provide a well-being. So this is where everything should merge, the daylight and the electrical or digital lighting all together. So there have been already some solutions. This is not new, but you can use some daylight harvesting in order not only to promote well-being, but also to save some energy. So the equation gets a little bit more complicated. It's a lot of factors involved. Also energy consumption. And if we go into energy consumption, there is this global lighting challenge in which the campaign tries to deploy 10 billion high efficient bulbs by 2030. So we can save energy and we can provide more energy for places that they don't have energy. But we should take into consideration a little bit more complex scenarios, like the whole global goals from the UN, some sustainable development ideas, and being able to also have some human-centered design methods. So we start combining more and more ideas to be able to have better tools with a better approach. So instead of just trying to change some light bulbs and of course be able to save some energy, my proposal would be to have a holistic lighting challenge in which we can have sustainable development for a human-centered lighting design for the lifetime, not only for 2013. And so lighting designers, architects, electrical engineers, and government, public institutions, universities, and associations can work together to create some quality and social sustainable and healthy oriented lighting projects. It's not enough to focus only on reduction of cost and CO2 emissions, but to provide a good, healthy, and inspiring lighting environments for the people. So all these people, the students, the future lighting designers, architects are being educated here, will have this approach, this philosophy in order to tackle the challenge of lighting spaces with quality and with responsibility. And going back to the ideas of the glass architecture from 1913, I just took the liberty of fixing a little bit this quoting. The power of daylight and artificial lighting has a direct connection between the architecture we live in and our thoughts, feelings, and health. And with this, I would like to conclude and invite the people to attend to the lights on at 6 in the main corridor created by the lighting design students of the master course. Thank you.